is I wanted to have a conversation specifically around leadership.
Oh,
because
yes.
Because I think that, you have on your journey so many different perspectives on this. And I thought that as an anchoring point, when I was kind of doing my prep for our interview, I was reading your contribution to the Renew 52 book. And so your chapter, as I'm sure you remember, was titled Change Our Posture by Serving the Other. And in it you write, a key aspect of congregational leadership has to be a willingness to engage in prophetic action that bridges the gap between what we believe to be true with the opportunities we provide to our members to practice this truth. So for my first question, tell me about the formational experiences that you've had that kind of led you to that conclusion. So was it a specific pastor or mentor or church context from growing up? Something that resonated from your seminary experience, or like something else altogether? But what was it that kind of brought you to seeing that as a key aspect of congregational leadership?
Yeah. Could you repeat just the quote again?
Yeah. A key aspect of congregational leadership has to be a willingness to engage in prophetic action that bridges the gap between what we believe to be true with the opportunities we provide to our members to practice this truth.
Yeah. It's interesting listening to, either listening to or rereading things that I've written or said. And the fact that actually there's been a consistency, right? That was written a long time ago. And I would say, yes, that is still true. So it's like, yes.
I still believe that.
I still believe that. So I think one of the things that is important for folks to know about me is the way that I was formed in leadership. So there are probably two things in particular that stand out to me in my own formation as a leader. One is that everyone has the gifts to lead, particularly if we understand leadership as the ability to influence. And ideally, right, prophetic or positive or transformative leadership is influencing towards positive things or prophetic things or transformative things. And so that was something that a mentor early on in my kind of ministry formation drilled into me, that everyone can be a leader because everyone actually has the ability to influence. Now the question becomes, what are your circles of influence and kind of the depth and the breadth of that? But by and large, a brother can influence a sister, a wife can influence her children or her husband or her partner. So this notion that everyone has an ability to influence is key to understanding kind of how I think about leadership. The other thing that I have become very clear of is that I believe that leaders, we are called to uncover and identify our values and then live our life in a way that reflects those values. And I say that not from a morality place as much as what are the things that we say matter, and then how are we arranging our life, our resources, our time to reflect that. And then a goal of a leader is to create the space for others to do that, those that they're leading or those that they're forming to do that. And I think about like kind of the evolution of leadership development and how it used to be, a leader was about followers, right? And how you get people to follow you. Then it was a leader is about getting people to kind of grab onto the vision that you cast, right? And so this whole notion of being a visionary leader came to pass, and how do you kind of influence those around you to then be visionary leaders, or to be leaders that at least lob on to your vision so that you're able to see that. Well, I'm very much operating from a standpoint now of leadership, and leadership development is about helping people uncover their own agency, helping people understand who they are as a leader, what their leadership style and philosophy is, and then creating space for them to practice what they've learned and also align what they say they value with what they do in the world. So yeah, a prophetic leader, right? Their role is to lead in ways that connect people to what I consider to be truth. And I think about truth as that which stands the test of time as it relates to relationship, as it relates to injustice, as it relates to connectedness. So to lead people towards that, but then empower folks and create space for folks to actually find their own voice, to find their own agency, and to do the process of aligning their values with their action.
Right. So when you wrote this entry for this chapter, you were at the time serving as the minister to youth, families, and young adults at Lutheran Church of the Redeemer in Atlanta. So in that kind of very localized context, and I think, in the local context that you're in today, what does it look like to have a prophetic voice in a local church setting. And specifically, I think, ministering to young people who sometimes have, I think, deeper questions about their own agency as a young person. So what does it look like to be a prophetic leader in a local church, and specifically when dealing with young adults?
I mean, I think a hallmark of prophetic leadership is question asking, and question asking for things that you don't necessarily have the answer to, but things that you see are, again, not aligned or disconnected, right? So in my work at Redeemer, this was a very both wealthy congregation and a congregation that said that they cared about the community. You know, it was in Atlanta, so civil rights and history is very important to not just the city, but I think leaders in that congregation. And yet there was no place or space where those things came together. And so, you know, for me, it's always about asking questions and observing what is, and then inviting people to consider what could be based on what they've already said is important. You know, we know that you know, the death of a leader can come when one tries to either impress upon people their own values or their own thoughts without actually doing the work of listening and observing. And so my work, in no matter what setting I've been in, has begun with first listening and observing. And so, for instance, one of the things that happened at Redeemer was every MLK weekend, every year, the high school group would go on a ski trip, you know, because they had a 4-day weekend or 3-day weekend. And that to me was very interesting, given that we were in Atlanta, that Atlanta, you know, was the home of so much dealing with the MLK holiday, but also a day of service. And the congregation really did nothing. And one of the, you know, ways that the congregation did engage through service was really doing acts of charity. And so, you know, for me, it became a conversation on, okay, if we say that this matters, how are we honoring that as a community of faith? How are we doing it in ways that's distinctive to who we are and the values that we have? And then what witness do we want to share with our community? And that led to a lot of questioning and some creative thinking and planning. And we did, you know, a lot of congregations do a day of service. So we actually did a day of service, but it was an intergenerational day of service. And congregational members and families and friends were able to sign up ahead of time. And then we had service that wasn't just acts of service, the doing, but listening and learning. So people were able to kind of sign up for a different track. And then we practiced kind of models of service learning where we gathered together, people prepared, people were sent, and then came back, we reflected as a community, and then people celebrated. And we invited folks that we were serving alongside to come back and celebrate with us. And for me, that was just a very little opportunity, a very small opportunity for people to ask questions about what they say they value and what they do or don't do. And so I think young people, though, are primed to engage in that way, because I think while they might live in a world and in a space that is trying to get them to be something that they're not, or that they're having to really fight to figure out who they are and what they value, I think both institutions of higher learning, I think programs that are focused on leadership development or discernment and vocation have the opportunity to invite people to take the time to reflect on who they are and how they want to show up in the world. And then we can create space for them to practice that. And then say, well, maybe it's not this, but it's that. Or maybe it's not that, but it's this. And really helping people kind of get that energy that they may not get in other places. So
Right. Well, so one of your other roles, and the one that I think first for a lot of different people in kind of the Valparaiso University context where people recognize you from, is your role with the national organization with the ELCA and serving as the director for young adult ministry. Do you think that it is easier to talk about leadership, both prophetic and otherwise, from the national platform or from the local platform? Or how did the way that you think about leadership change as you went from kind of one context to another?
Yeah, and then back to another context. Right. So I think, you know, based on the gifts of a speaker or presenter or leader, and again, leader is someone who has the ability to influence folks, yeah, I could talk about anything, no matter where I'm at. I think the practice of leadership development has to be rooted somewhere. And I think that's true of any practice that we engage in. And so I think the thing that became clear for me is that I actually created practices or spaces to practice the development of leadership for young adults. But the recognition really is that was more of a programmatic thing. And, the national the denominational offices really look at staff in director positions more as thought leaders or people that are able to kind of be resource people. And while that is something that I am also passionate about and is a part of who I am, I'm really interested in communities of practice and in funding opportunities and experiences for people to gain skills, to come to know what their skills inherently are, to put that stuff to practice and then to reflect on it and to keep moving and growing. And so I think that is probably a big difference that I didn't even realize before I took that position. That, by and large, that institution is not necessarily about developing communities of practice as much as it is about being resource people or thought leaders for particular areas, like people that have expertise in particular areas. And so I found myself kind of in this place of dissonance because I really want to practice, what it is I am passionate about. And I think you do that best in community, and you do that best in contexts that are closer to the ground. And so even while my work with Mission Year right now is it's part-time, part of that for me was intentional because there were some other things that I wanted to explore, but also that I know that I needed to be in community with young adults in the city that I call home, with my feet on the ground in order to continue to learn and grow myself. So.
Right. Well, so one of the other professional roles that you have today is serving as a consultant with LEAD, a leadership development organization focused on empowering Christian leaders and transforming faith communities. Do you think that there are different claims or expectations attributed to leaders in faith communities that are different than that we expect of business leaders or people leading secular nonprofits? But more importantly, is that fair and appropriate?
So first answer, yes, there absolutely are differences in terms of expectations. And sometimes I think that we, and I'm using we now as a member of a congregation or a faith community, we actually kind of check some of our thinking selves at the door. And I think I've learned increasingly that I'm someone who is theologically trained, and, going to school with others who are now pastors and leaders in our church, there is no real focus on leadership development. And so, now I'm in this space where I get to look towards what we would call traditionally secular markets for education around that, because we as, a community of faith have not invested really in leadership. And that also, happened while I was at Churchwide, the denominational office for the ELCA, because at some point it was recognized that, we haven't really been uplifting and training kind of the next generation of leaders, and there's this massive group of folks that will be retiring, and so a leadership development program was crafted specifically that looked at increasing kind of the bench strength and tapping what was considered to be the best and the brightest for institutional development. And I was one of the inaugural 15 that was a part of that, and it was a great learning experience, and I feel like I grew so much. And I was very clear that there is nothing that I had gotten to that point from the church that actually focused on that. So yeah, I think there are different expectations. I think that we also, as a church, deal with a culture of nice. And so we expect our leaders to be nice versus prophetic, or anything else. We just want you to be nice. And I think pastoral has become a term that we use for someone being nice and kind, right? And the values that I hold for leaders are not always values that we see, I think, lifted up in our congregation. So what does it mean to be accountable? What does it mean to be constantly learning? I have an expectation as a leader for myself that I'm always being coached or mentored. And I think about the number of our pastors or religious leaders that are not coached, that are not mentored, let alone anything dealing with therapy or their own personal, ongoing personal development and growth. The fact that so many pastors have to fight for continuing education, I think that's problematic, because how is someone supposed to become better? And not just that their theological tools, but their leadership tools. And so many pastors, particularly in the ELCA, pastor congregations where they're kind of it. There is a council, but they tend to not only be the pastor, they have to do administrative duties, they have to do, PR and marketing duties. There are all of these things, and none of that, right, is covered in our theological education. And so, I think there's a huge gap between the gifts that leaders both innately have, but also that could be cultivated for them to be stronger and more adaptive leaders. And that's one of the things that I love working with an organization like LEAD, is that LEAD's focus is on both congregations, so the leadership teams of congregations, but also on pastors. And so we provide coaching, we provide learning seminars, we provide tools where we've done the work to combine the resources of both adaptive leadership and communication, emotional intelligence, but that is connected with our faith and spirituality in a way that people are empowered and hopefully gifted to lead for change.
Right. What would you say are some of the questions or concerns you hear most often when working with people or coaching people around leadership?
I think that so many people suffer with self-doubt, even those that are already in leadership positions. I think that a lot of people have prototypes in mind of what a leader is and isn't, and that they're not it. So for me, so much of my work is about deconstructing what people think a leader is, how a leader should be, and then helping them reconstruct that with, I think, two things that we've learned through research are the most important. So one is adaptability, so adaptive leadership and the flexibility that comes with that, and also the recognition that you're learning certain skills that are not necessarily the technical skills, but skills that then allow you to operate in any situation. I mean, I often say this is why I was a humanities person, and my background is sociology, right? Like, I was taught how to think and how to think critically, and that has taken me a long way. But then also the fact that emotional intelligence is something that, I'd rather have someone who was emotionally intelligent that had all the skills but was not aware. So I think deconstructing with folks their kind of images of what a leader is or what a leader isn't. And then I think the notion that we have to, and this goes with deconstructing, but the difference between management and leadership, and I think so many organizations and institutions are created so folks manage, whereas, I think, again, leading is really about casting vision, empowering others to cast vision, tackling issues with creative or innovative solutions, working collaboratively. And I think that change kind of startles people because it's like, what do you mean? Oh, wait, that's both more than I signed up for, but also, am I really able to do that? Right. My answer is, yeah, you probably are. Now the question becomes, how do you grow in those areas, and what kind of support do you need, to be able to do that? But yeah, I think when it comes to coaching leaders, I hear those things a lot. And then the other thing I would say, I think everybody is trying to figure out issues around time and, living a balanced life. I used to say, and I think I still believe this, I don't think balance is possible, because I do think that there are certain times in our life that are just out of whack, for lack of a better phrase. But I think I've been striving increasingly for centeredness. So, what are the things, the practices, the relationships that I need to have and nurture in order for me to be centered? Because my life will be out of balance at times. But if I am centered and come back to the things that really tether me, then there's a huge difference, even in the midst of the chaotic life that I live. And so that's been something that I've been hearing and also been trying to figure out, for myself as well.
Right. So I like to transition a little bit and talk about leadership in the context of struggle. So you helped to found Resist Houston, which you describe as a community of connection, empowerment, and support for resistance against injustice. How do you balance the anger and kind of, I think, the hopelessness that accompanies so much of today's struggle? It feels like you go through the news and it's like, what is there to kind of hold on to as we're kind of seeing different things spin out? So how do you accompany today's struggle with your desire to seek justice with, as you put it, mercy, humility, and love? So I think we have these kind of overwhelming emotions that are very natural to feel in light of everything, but you really wanting to underscore, I think, specifically like the humility and love piece. How do you kind of lead with those as the touchstones in what I think is a really acrimonious time?
Right. I think So for me, community is hugely important. And so when I am both overwhelmed or when the hopelessness and despair rise up, for me, my own personal community, my inner circle community, like knowing that there are others who are feeling what I'm feeling or, struggling with things that I'm struggling with actually makes a difference for me. And then that becomes kind of the way that I lead, you know? So with Resist Houston, that came out because so many people were just like, what are we doing? Like, what are we going to do? Like, how do we combat things that we see that have been present in our society, but are now, you know, being shared in very overt ways? And how do we deal with this? And so my job is to then bring people together. Like, let's create community. Like, I know how to do that. And then, like, I am of the founders, I'm the only, like, faith, I mean, I think there are people of faith, but, like, I'm the only person that is a part of my everyday life in a particular way. And so then I kind of become, like, the chaplain of the community. You know, and, you know, but non-spiritual chaplain. So, like, what does it mean to, you know, care for folks and create, I mean, all the things that I feel like we learn when we talk about grieving or when people are dealing with trauma, like how are you creating spaces for people to be heard, for people to vent, right? And then to help turn that into action. You know, one of my mentors, the Reverend Dr. Stephen Bowman, who is the director for the domestic mission unit of the ELCA, used to tell me that, you know, a movement without spirituality, now I'm going to try to remember this. Hold on. I'll say the whole quote in a second. So spirituality without justice, right, can become stagnant and just die. And then justice without spirituality, like becomes untenable. It's not sustainable, right? The fire, it's like the fire and the kindling just burn off. Like it burns off so quickly. And anger is the fire. And that is something that burns off. So part of the work that I feel that I'm called to is to help people deal with what they're feeling, like name it and like validate it and say, you have every right to feel this way. And then what does this mean for the work that we're called to do, right? And I used to use this with young people all the time. I start off talking about what in this world causes you holy anger or righteous indignation, because we can work with that. You know, like if you are aware and if you are feeling something, that can definitely be, you know, used to figure out what to do next. So I feel like community is hugely important. I feel like connection, so not just to people, but connection to ongoing learning. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is connecting people across lines, all kinds of lines. But really, I'm really interested in doing that also globally, right? So to talk to freedom fighters in South Africa or, you know, folks who were standing up against the powers that be in Guatemala, or to talk to folks in the West Bank in Palestine, you know, and to have people connect with them, and then to see another vantage point and angle, but also to get some creative thoughts going around, okay, what does resistance against injustice look like in my context, in my community, and how maybe can we unite across these lines? I think that that's really powerful. And that also could be sustaining, you know, for folks that are in the struggle. But I think it's really hard, and I think we end up seeing people isolating. And once we become isolated, you know, the anger can take over, and then that can lead to dangerous places. So.
Right. Well, so we're having this conversation less than a week after the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, which at a Lutheran institution was a very big deal. And so as part of a tradition that kind of calls us to semper reformanda, or to always be reforming, what insights do you have about how to lead well through difference? Because I think so much of today's response, I think, to both spiritual and political concerns is to separate ourselves from people who think differently. And I think that some of the more recent scholarship around the Reformation, I think with an emphasis on ecumenism, is this idea that like splitting is not necessarily always the best way forward. So obviously I don't think any of us have it all figured out, but any insights you have on kind of leading well through difference?
Yeah. So, okay, so I'm first going to say that difference that denies the humanity of another is one thing. And I'm not going to talk to that right now.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, if someone does not believe that I have the right to exist, or that I don't have the right to equal or equitable access to things because of some aspect of my identity, that's challenging. And we know that that still exists today. And,
right.
And that's challenging for a variety of reasons. But I do want to talk about maybe some other types of difference as we think about leading through difference. One of the things that I've become clearer about is that I don't necessarily, there's nothing at stake for me in engaging with folks that I may not agree with or that think differently about it, right? Like, I'm clear about who I am. I'm clear about what I value. I'm open that this, I think I know enough and have experienced enough that I believe and trust the Spirit will do things that even surprise me. And so, my prayer is to remain open and to remain discerning. But at the end of the day, when I engage with someone who is different or has a different, way of thinking about things than I do, I don't really have a dog in the fight. Like, I'm honestly there to engage and try to understand where they're coming from. And I think kind of that posture then changes the whole dynamic, because now you're not there to convince someone, you're there to listen, and then I think there's a part of me that is naive, that does believe that for the most part, humanity, for the most part, we all tend to want the same things, right? We all want safety and security, and I think in this country we talk about opportunity and access to resources, and there's a part of me that trusts that if we are forming a relationship, and if I believe that the Spirit is in the midst of us, right, that we are the people on the Emmaus Road, we are not Jesus showing up on the Emmaus Road, but we are on the Emmaus Road and Jesus shows up to us, then I think anything can be surmounted. I think when it becomes insurmountable is when people are trying to convince or fight for or lift up their way of being as the right or the only way of being. And then I think that, of course you're not going to win, because everyone is trying to protect, their spot. I would say the other thing that this makes me think about is we have to ask ourselves why we do hold so tightly to certain things. And again, barring, I don't know, it's a slippery slope. Why do we have to be right? Like, any of us, right? Because there are things that I am pretty sure that I'm right about. And then the question I have to ask myself is, why do I have to be right in this situation or moment? And yeah, maybe that makes sense and is easier for the smaller divisions. The bigger ones are tougher for me. I don't know how to engage someone who fundamentally doesn't think that I have the right to exist or to lead or to serve.
Right.
Because of my personhood that I have no control over.
Right.
And that's a struggle. But I think when I'm at my best, I would like to believe that both listening and discerning and reflecting, but then owning who I am, are all a part of the way forward. And yet so many of us don't even begin with the listening, right? We refuse to even be in relationships where people think differently. Right. I've often been joked, my friends make fun of me because I am the friend that has friends from every other race group, right? And I can remember my 21st birthday, we had a party at my house, and I had been working at a summer camp, but we all came back for the weekend for my birthday. And so here I am, the only black person on camp staff, with a camp staff of about 20 folks, all white, coming to my parents' house in Houston, Texas, with all of my friends that I grew up with and went to high school with, most of whom were black. And for the first hour of the party, like, everyone was separated. White folks were outside, black folks were inside, like, the two did not meet. And at some point I was like, no, we're not doing this. No. So I turned off the music and I was like, we're going to play Taboo. And you have to be on a team with someone that is of a, like, you have to mix it up. Like, I was almost short of doing like count off, 1, 2, 1, 2. Because the reality was that we are so used to being separate that we couldn't even see the similarities. And that was when I was 21, 15 years ago. And now every year I do a women's visioning brunch where I have people come together to do their vision boards for the next year. And I had women of every background. I have friends of all backgrounds. My mother has friends of all backgrounds. And again, when they came in, they got a name tag and they were invited to sit with someone that they did not know, and they were going to introduce them. That was the activity, right? To introduce folks. Because again, we are too comfortable being divided.
Right.
And so much of how I understand both leadership and kind of the way that I engage the world is to ask questions of folks. You know, why is it this way? When did it become this way? When was the last time you engaged in a conversation with someone who was different? What did you learn? Like, and that's so much of the work that I also do in coaching, is to ask questions to get people to get to that inner knowledge and wisdom. So I think it's a tough one. I mean, the divisions that we have, but if parties are not even interested in listening, if parties are not even interested in asking questions of themselves and of each other, then I don't know, how we move forward.
Well, so as someone who spends so much time talking and teaching about these concepts, where do you go for sustenance, and what are areas where you'd still like to learn more and grow?
I mean, I think my faith community, and I wanted that not to be true for so long, but church is really important to me. The gathered community, and I have recently connected with a dinner church in Houston, and so eating around a table and praying together and listening to scripture, and that is absolutely sustaining. Time with my family and my inner circle of friends, like I will move heaven and earth, even if it's on the way to or from an event, to see people that I care about and that I can both love on, but that also can love on me. So those are huge for me. I'm constantly learning, and I still, I'm very curious about kind of the connection between coaching and spiritual direction, how those two things come together. I am increasingly interested in social entrepreneurship. So what does it mean to find innovative solutions to social problems? And, how can I be enterprising in the midst of that? So I feel like there's so much for me to learn from the business side of things, because that's not my background. I'm always, so my degree was sociology and African studies, my undergraduate degree. And with African studies, I have always been fascinated, not just by the continent of Africa, but by also tracing my own lineage as far back as I can. And I'm kind of in the process now of doing my ancestry, and I've visited currently about 5 countries on the continent, and my goal is to visit many, many more as I'm learning about the different regions of the continent and the ways in which colonization negatively impacted a people and a place. So those are just some of the and I'll read anything about leadership. I'll read anything about, I feel like leadership tends to be my thing right now. But also, I've also fallen in love recently with memoirs. And, so much of what I am passionate about is finding meaning in my life and helping others do that. And memoirs do it. And so whether it's memoirs or stories that have been released after folks have passed, or stories of people kind of uncovering that and just wisdom that they've learned, that has been really a huge thing for me. Right now I'm finishing up Thrive by Arianna Huffington. It's an older book. I feel like maybe 5 years now, if even that long. And she talks about, uncovering wisdom and wonder, and, this notion that we are so, we're tired, physically and mentally and emotionally. And so I've been reading more around, okay, how does sleep impact me? How am I taking time to just actually experience wonder? And how that can then impact my creative juices? And then what is the wisdom that flows around me, and how am I taking the time to soak that up and reflect on that? But you will always find me with a book in my bag, a podcast that I'm listening. I listen to TED Radio Hour every day. I'm constantly on the lookout for the ways people are figuring out how to manage this world in their life and learning from that. So.
Excellent. Well, Rozella, thank you. I feel like we have so much more to learn from you. So
thank you.
Thank you for this.
Yeah.